Why does Trump praise the era between 1870 and 1913? Maybe because back then, white men ran everything. They had full control over the government, the economy, the land, and even their wives' money. Even white women had no full legal rights to their own property or earnings. Black people, native people, and immigrants lived under strict control, fear, and violence. It was a time when white men didn't just hold power, they were the law. But to understand the truth behind this so-called greatest period, we must step back and look at what was happening in America. Let's start by walking through the major events that shaped this era. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave black men the legal right to vote. But just 3 years later, in what's now called the Colfax Massacre, over 100 black men were unalived for simply trying to vote. In 1876, the Supreme Court ruled the federal government couldn't stop private racial violence, so black voters were left unprotected. In 1877, Reconstruction ended. Federal troops left the South. White supremacist governments quickly returned to power. Southern states had already created black codes to control black people after slavery. With no one stopping them, those black codes spread and grew even worse. They later became the full Jim Crow laws that locked in segregation and discrimination for generations. In 1890, the Wounded Knee Massacre happened. Native Americans from the Lakota tribe were living in a South Dakota camp when U.S. troops moved in. Hundreds of men, women, and children were unalived. It marked the brutal end of Native armed resistance, and showed how far the U.S. government would go to take Native lands and crush Native freedom. At the same time, many black families were losing their land too. Between 1888 and 1890, families who had worked hard to improve their land were being forced off by violence and threats. My own ancestors were part of that story. They started working their land in 1879 and secured their homestead in 1884. It was 169 acres of farmland in Smith County, Mississippi. By 1884, they had cleared 25 acres, built a home with a kitchen, a smokehouse, 2 horse barns. They had done everything the law required. But despite all that hard work and legal ownership, they were forced to leave between 1888 and 1890. Freedom was promised, but protection was not. The story of my family being forced off their land was passed down for generations. Through African American genealogy research, I was able to prove it with official records. Want to discover your family history? Follow me, at Carolyn A. Thompson. African American genealogy starts here. The truth is, for many formerly enslaved families, the Homestead Act was not real freedom. It was a setup. They were told to work the land, improve it, and build a future. But once the land became valuable, they were threatened, attacked, and forced to flee the state. Freedom was written on paper, but stolen in real life. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. They said that segregation was legal under the idea of separate but equal. But separate was never meant to be equal. This decision opened the door for legal segregation in schools, transportation, restaurants, and every part of daily life. It gave states the green light to lock black Americans out of opportunity for generations. The case, called Plessy versus Ferguson, started when Homer Plessy, a black man, refused to leave a seat reserved for white passengers on a train in Louisiana. He was arrested for breaking segregation laws, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. At the time, Grover Cleveland had just left office, and William McKinley had just been elected president. Neither one spoke out against the ruling. But it was not just the South. The silence came from the North, the West, and from the White House itself. Across the entire country, few people spoke up. Segregation, racism, and injustice were allowed to spread, unchallenged. In 1898, the Spanish-American War began. The United States went to war with Spain over its colonies in the Caribbean and the Pacific. By the end of the war, the U.S. had taken control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. America was now seen as a rising world power. But while the country was expanding overseas, injustice continued at home. Black Americans who served in the war fought bravely for a country that still denied them basic rights. Freedom was being promised abroad, while freedom at home remained out of reach for millions. In 1901, President William McKinley was unalived. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt became the new president. Roosevelt believed in expanding American power around the world. He helped the U.S. take control of the Panama Canal. And he strengthened the Navy, and pushed for American influence in the Caribbean and the Pacific. But at home, justice was ignored. Black Americans continued losing land through violence, unfair laws, and forced sales. Native Americans kept losing their land and culture under broken promises, and the Dawes Act. After the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was renewed and strengthened, Chinese immigrants faced harsh discrimination. East Indian immigrants, many with dark complexions, were treated like black Americans under racist laws. They were blocked from owning land, banned from becoming citizens, and attacked in the streets. Across America, skin color decided your future. If you were not white, you were pushed down, locked out, or run out. The government focused on building power overseas, while millions of people at home were left unprotected and unseen. In 1906, Upton Sinclair published a book called The Jungle. It was published, exposing the terrible conditions inside America's meatpacking factories. Workers, many of them poor immigrants, worked long hours, in unsafe and filthy environments. Diseased meat was packaged and sold to the public with no safety laws in place. The book shocked the nation, and led to the first major food safety laws, including the Meat Inspection Act, and the Pure Food and Drug Act. But while the government moved quickly to protect the food supply, it continued to ignore the violence and injustice faced by workers. Safety mattered when it came to meat. Justice for people was still treated as optional. During this same period, tariffs became a major way. The government protected big business at the expense of everyday people. Tariffs are taxes placed on goods that come from other countries. At the time, tariffs were the government's main source of money, because there was no income tax yet. High tariffs made foreign goods more expensive, forcing people to buy American products. Big companies like steel, railroads, and oil corporations loved tariffs, because they helped them dominate the American market without competition. But tariffs made life harder for farmers, workers, and poor families. The McKinley Tariff of 1890 and the Dingley Tariff of 1897 raised prices on food, clothing, and tools. Black Americans, Native Americans, Chinese immigrants, and East Indian workers paid more for basic goods, but got none of the protection. The rich got richer, while working people struggled to survive. In 1913, the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified. It created the first permanent income tax. The goal was to shift the burden from poor and working class people onto the wealthy by taxing earnings. At first, only the richest Americans were expected to pay income taxes. It was seen as a step toward fairness. But many wealthy families soon found ways to avoid paying through loopholes and special laws. In 1913, another major shift was happening. White women took to the streets, demanding the right to vote. Their march in D.C. faced resistance, but marked a bold step toward change. But as voices rose for justice, daily costs kept climbing. Even today, we can see how companies could raise prices during a crisis. During and after COVID, the cost of everyday items jumped by $5 to $10. Even after supply problems were solved. If a new tariff war happens now, it could give big businesses another excuse to raise prices again, while everyday people are left struggling once more. Let's explore a few important events from 1870 to 1913 that didn't make the headlines. In 1873, a financial crisis known as the Panic of 1873 triggered a major economic depression. Workers, farmers, and small businesses were crushed, while the wealthy survived and gained more control. In 1892, the Homestead strike took place at Carnegie Steel in Pennsylvania. Workers fought for better pay and conditions. But companies used violence and government support to break the strikes. It showed that they don't care about poor white workers either, when they challenged big money. In 1909, the NAACP was founded. Black leaders came together to legally fight against racial injustice and to push for civil rights in the courts. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire unalived over 140 in New York City. The tragedy exposed the dangerous working conditions many faced and led to early labor reforms. We have explored how the laws between 1870 and 1913 shaped the nation. But laws were only part of the story. If you want to know how Black Americans, Native Americans, White Americans, Asians and European immigrants survived these hard times, and how their struggles shaped future generations, be sure to watch the next video. 1870 to 1913, when freedom wasn't meant for everyone. That's a wrap, history seekers. Getting to the roots is where history comes alive. We uncover the truth about Africa, African Americans, and American history, one story at a time. Thanks for watching. Peace and love.